And so you mentioned that you want to do career and some issues around relationships that might be coming for you.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Just health, I think.
And
Health
health.
as an additional, yeah.
Okay. All
But,
right.
yeah.
Very good. All right. So welcome. I'm going to share the screen and we can look at the chart together.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do, we'll just do a really quick tour of the natal chart here. I want to confirm the data. So we've got 11th of February 95 at 1:32 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
Nottingham. Great.
Yeah.
And so that, I think you're already aware, gives you a Scorpio rising. And so generally speaking, when we see somebody with a Scorpio rising chart, there is some kind of issue or drama or even potentially death in the family around the time that an individual is born and around the time that the parents conceive and around the time that the child is born. And it can be that another child has passed before you, for example. There was a loss of child in the family or actually your parents, or it can be that there was an important family member who died or a dear close friend. And often this really marks the individual, it marks the parents, and it sets them up potentially for depression or feeling of sufferance. We could call it suffering in some way in the family. So this can be the energy that you come into, which is almost like you're here almost to like as a salvation in a way. You're here almost to fix the problem. And we see that because we see then the sun is in Aquarius. And so we have this contrast between this kind of heavenly realm of Aquarius and this kind of dark and deathly realm of Scorpio. This is a very, very big contrast. And it puts a lot of pressure on the native, puts a lot of pressure on the individual coming. And we see this, the family pressure is strong in the charts like this, that there's a connection with the family, either coming from family links and karma, or there's a pressure that's actually kind of in the day-to-day life where there's an expectation that's hard to fulfill. In your chart as well, we can see that there's a lot of challenges around just kind of being yourself. It almost feels like a day-to-day battle just to be yourself. And that you're maybe always having a feeling of having to really make an effort to communicate or an effort to show up in the way that you want to be. First, we see the sun is opposing the chart ruler, Mars. So Mars rules your ascendant from the 10th house, which makes it a really powerful Mars. It's a stubborn Mars as well. It's a retrograde Mars in Leo, so pretty stubborn. And with a pretty stubborn Aquarius sun to boot in opposition. And that is creating a kind of a T-square with your ascendant. So it feels like there's quite a lot of like having to really kind of prove yourself again and again in your day-to-day existence. Or at the very least, it's perhaps with regards to your family. It might be that with siblings, for example, that there has been, because your Mercury is squaring the nodes here, retrograde Mercury in Aquarius, good strong mind. And yet there seems to be this tension that can be there with the siblings, for example, or kind of a stress potentially with sisters if you have them, or cousins or siblings of some kind, where they may have put you down, or there may have been a kind of a competition between you that was not super friendly. Was that your experience growing up, or was it maybe peers, friends groups?
I think for me, it was more peers, friend groups. But same with siblings, to be honest, because I have a sister, but she's a lot older than me. So she's 15 years older than me.
Okay.
So in a way, she's supportive, but at the same time, quite harsh at the same time.
Right.
So
she was another adult in your life, really.
Yeah.
So because we can see that connection here too with Chiron trining Uranus from the 3rd to the 11th. So we see that there's this challenge in kind of fitting in or feeling welcome. That could be another way of saying it, feeling welcome in society or in groups or in friend circles. It costs a lot of effort on your part, and that can be difficult in the early years. It seems like self-esteem was a challenge. There may have again been some real expectations from the family, that made it feel like you were under obligations in some ways at home. Again, just that Saturn on the IC. So I'm using whole sign houses, just to be clear that the ascendant is within the first house and not creating the first, not starting the first house. And the midheaven, rather than starting the 10th house, is within another house. It floats around. It can often be around the 10th, but in the winter in Nottingham, it ends up where the sun peaks is quite low in the sky. So we have it in the 11th house.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might seem a bit unusual if you're not familiar with the whole signs. But with the fifth house Saturn, there's again another message of challenge in self-expression, or a challenge in finding the courage or the confidence in self-expression. And it's a very broad trine to the ascendant, but it's still Saturn trines the ascendant. And Saturn is also in a sextile to Venus. So there can be some feelings of, in early on, the Saturn rules that Venus. And so there can be some feelings of just not being good enough, or not fitting in some way. And this later on becomes incredibly powerful. It can be very emotionally resilient, can be very, very good for entrepreneurial energy. Venus in the third, ruled by Saturn in the fifth, fantastic for entrepreneurship. You have the midheaven in the 11th, which is the house of gains by what you do, with Mars in the 10th, which gives you great drive and ambition. And even working from home, Mars in the 10th, in opposition to the sun that it rules. So this Mars in Leo is ruled by the sun in opposition. So home run business, for example, or family business can be very successful. You have a really good income potential, good wealth potential. You have to be careful with the Jupiter there, though, because it can also have you spending a fair bit. So you have to be just a little careful. But this is mitigated a little bit because it's also ruling that Saturn in Pisces, and it's squaring. So you have a certain amount of reserve in terms of, you probably don't go way overboard, just every now and then overboard. But it's good that it kind of mitigates that from the Saturn in Pisces. And then that Jupiter squares Saturn, just in general, and this can be whether it be with regards to work or relationships or kind of starting out in new adventures, there can be this issue or this kind of feeling of what is the right time to do something? When should I? There can be this feeling that I know what I want to do. I have these ideas or these big plans that just doesn't seem to materialize in the way that I want it to. That can be both this square with Saturn, which can be this kind of feeling of stopping and starting, or kind of like all in and then stop, or all in and then hold it out, hold on until the moment seems to kind of fizzle out. So this can be something that is balanced over time. It's a thing that is kind of a learned skill, is to balance out the judgment and the conservatism, and the enthusiasm and the restraint. It's this kind of balancing act throughout life. And that's a similar story with that Mercury retrograde in Aquarius that is squaring the nodes. So just to set this up, because when we look at the transits, we want that to have relevance to the chart itself. Let's have a look at what's going on now. So we saw, of course, we've had these eclipses. I'm going to pull them up, and we'll just look first of all at the 5th of May eclipse that just happened, which for you, it's not directly significant in terms of your ascendant and descendant. What is really powerful, it happened during the eclipse, but it was not specific to the eclipse, is that you're having a second, or it's even the third pass of Uranus over your descendant. That also means that it's squaring your sun. Right, so we've got your sun is squaring the ascendant and descendant axis. That's another signature of ambition and drive. You've got a really good, strong, we could almost call it a T-square. It's not really tight, but it's not a T-square, a grand square, grand fixed cross, another way of saying that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really great for drive and ambition. One of the challenges in that natally is that you can, and especially with that Mercury squaring the nodes, you can sometimes be your own worst enemy in the way that you approach things, or that you might come across really strong, and get yourself into a bit of hot water, or have to backtrack in some way. Now with Uranus coming up here, there's a real urge to transform yourself as well as relationships. Perhaps if you are in relationships, that's been something that has been going through the ringer, transforming, whether it be the people or the type of people that you relate to. This, of course, can be your intimate partner too, or business partners as well. And that Uranus squaring the sun is really specifically with regards to career, and what it is that you want, how you see yourself, let's say, in life, what it is that you really want out of life. And this is really fundamentally being changed. And that you would have already experienced to a certain extent at the end of last summer. So you would have felt that beginning from the end of July, we had that triple conjunction of Uranus, the North Node, and Mars. And that was at this almost the same degree. So conjunct your descendant to within a degree, opposing your ascendant, and about 3 degrees off your sun in terms of square, and quite a few degrees off the Mars there. But since it's still in relationship, it's always going to be affected by these, by the axis of the ascendant. So this is the last time now that you're going to get Uranus going over your descendant. So whatever the message was, I think you got it. It's maybe not seen the actual results yet. It may not pan out until it's well past that point, or until it actually exactly squares that sun, and that could be where you start to you get more clear what it is that you need to change. So that you're going to find. I mean, the exact is coming up. I'll just have to move my, so the summertime, you're going to experience that in July. This is a really big signature for career change. New role, new job, new way of seeing yourself. Let's put that down here. And there's a note, I mean, obviously the nodal movement as well has already been a big significator for you. At the same time as that, Uranus is squaring your sun, you've got Jupiter on the south node. So something also in a woman's chart, Jupiter represents the spouse. It can represent, it can be a karaka for children, but here we're in the 7th house, so it's more likely partners. Jupiter also is, of course, abundance, and particularly so in Taurus. And so this can show a desire for something very different. So when the planets like Jupiter cross over the south node, it's more like the thing that's new that's coming in to your 7th house is also in the case of the south node. It's also something that you're going to have to give up in terms of relationship. Or it can be a way of being in relationship, because fundamentally you've had the reverse nodal return recently, and that would have been probably over the winter. You would have experienced that in the beginning of the year, and that reverse nodal return is like a check-in. It's kind of like saying, okay, well, what has to happen here that's new? What do I need to shed that it will change the way I am in terms of showing up in relationship? What kinds of relationships do I want? This is anyway what Uranus has been challenging you to kind of experiment with since 2018. And but then when Jupiter passes over the south node in opposition to your north node, now there's something distinctly different that has to happen in relationship. And it can be that, for example, a new type of relationship is there for you. Like a new person can symbolize a person, but also a new quality of relationship. And I think you'll only be able to see that after this passage of the summer. I think it'll probably, it may show up around that time of late June, early July, but it's probably more likely after the summer. You have a really wonderful passage. Oh, by the way, and that Uranus is also coming up at the same time, starting then the orb of a square to Mars. And at the same time that that's happening, you're having a Mars return. So if we go back in time, I want Mars to be up there all alone. So Mars is going into your 10th house just days after Jupiter goes into your 7th. So this is really big for business, for if you'd like to reach out into business with a partnership. This is really good for partners. It's good for trying to assert yourself if you need to step up and do interviews, or if you need to put yourself out there and meet people. With Jupiter going through the 7th, you tend to have really helpful contacts with people, helpful people in coming into your experience that can also bring good counsel into your life, and people who are supportive in a way that gives you good advice.
Mm.
And then with that Mars going through your 10th house, it's going to just add to that quality of drive. Now, it's exactly opposite Pluto in the second half of May. You'll feel that already, probably by the time Mercury goes direct in around the 15th of May. So it's coming up quite soon. And then Mars opposite Pluto. So this is where you want to maybe start to reflect on what it is that you need to feel secure, because this is the big message of the next 20 years. With Pluto going through the 4th house, it can also have you needing to reflect on how you connect with family, how you connect emotionally or psychologically with the roots of your family, or your family experience, your ancestral experience potentially, but most importantly with your own inner kind of emotional needs and psychological needs, because that's already there with the Mercury squaring the nodes from the 4th, and in a semi-sextile to Venus. There seems to be, this, and also with the Saturn on the IC, there seems to be this kind of potential for feeling a little bit down. So you have this really interesting chart where there's this kind of tendency to be a little bit pessimistic or kind of expect the worst. And yet you've got this very sweet little moon up there at the beginning of Cancer that is like uber optimistic. It's like moon in the 9th house. It's like, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to sort itself out. I'm going to be able to do this. It's a very broad opposition to Venus, but it is in an opposition to Venus, which can be supportive. It can pose some challenges with relationships in terms of expressing needs, but that also comes back to the Mercury, for example, Mercury in the 4th retrograde, squaring the nodes. It might be that there's a difficulty in knowing really what you need or want to feel secure. With Pluto in the 4th now and in that opposition to Mars, these questions might start to come up. You're in these really big kind of once in a lifetime transits. You've just had that Pluto conjunction to Uranus, and you're going to get it again as Pluto backs in to Capricorn over the weeks ahead, and then and it's going to speak to that change that you've gone, whatever the change was that you've undergone over the last year and a half, because these are so slow. This is actually going to last until 2025, this whole process of change between 2022 and 2025. So if we just come back to now and we look at that Mars once again, so Mars opposing that Pluto can generate some real anger or tension that can be either with family, or it can be with authority figures, or it could be even with a boss. If you're currently working, that Mars is ruling your 6th house as well, so that can be your everyday work, and also that can be any potential around health issues, inflammation, for example. Or if there are issues of, again, it can be that the issues are more psychological or emotional, that there's almost a psychosomatic quality to the ailment, where it's just bordering on depression. there may be depression in the family, where parents have been going through really rough times. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there can be a signature of something that was really challenging around the time you came in.
Um, yeah, I think you're right there. In
Yeah.
terms of what you said previously, it was more, I think my mom had a miscarriage before me.
Oh, yeah.
So, but then there's been a lot of death in the family when I
Yeah.
was young, a lot of death, close family members. So very challenging in terms of when I came in before
Yeah.
and after. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is there. It's in the family sort of energy, if you like, and you plop yourself into this. So it's not about Che, it's about a baby coming into this atmosphere, which is quite hard for the adults to manage because they're already trying to grapple with what's going on. And so, why I say this is because it looks to me like if there are any issues that might come up around health, that it's going to be recalling that what is not entirely yours, it's like an inherited pattern of feeling of, I don't want to quite say despair, but it feels like it's approaching that. It's like, what's the point? Nothing's ever going to work out. It's why is this always hard? And so you want to make sure you don't fall down that road. With Pluto going through the fourth house, it's going to completely overhaul what you could consider to be the spiritual, emotional, psychological, and then even the physical foundations of your life, meaning where you live, how you live, with whom you live. And then you've got Saturn next year in 2024 that's going to go across your IC, so conjuncting the IC and opposing the MC. So that's going to come back and potentially touch on this more fundamental issue of your sense of, am I good enough? Am I, have I got what it takes? Do I have support to do the things that I want to do? And recognizing that, it's not for nothing that you get these really strong placements. You're here with the North Node in the first house to be quite powerfully standing on your own 2 feet, and that doesn't exclude a relationship. It means that you're here specifically to really be a resource unto yourself, which again doesn't mean that you don't ask for help. It means that you're really here to engage fully on your own terms, which this Saturn, at least in the first part of life, seems to be preventing. Feels like hard to just be yourself, hard to just kind of be naturally the way that you want to be. Self-expression can be challenging. Then we have, in Leo, which is all about self-expression, naturally ruling that fifth house. We've got a retrograde Mars, which is opposing the Sun, which is the self, which is you. And there seems to be some kind of resentment or anger around that. And that might have something to do with this family difficulty that you were born into, where it's kind of like, hey, I'm here. I exist. So there's a bit of this kind of a need to be alive on your own terms, but it seems like that's always a bit of a battle. The Sun in Aquarius is often about a search for identity, and especially there in the fourth house, it's really an identity separate from the family identity, or a role in life, let's say, separate to what the family might have felt was your role, if you know what I mean. Like either you very strongly had an unconsciously non-spoken, non-verbal assignment of a role in the family, or your family had expectations of how you would behave in the world. And I think this is something that you want to keep in mind as you're looking for work, for example, or changing the job, because part of what you're really here to learn and to expand into is just to be yourself, and doing that in a way that is going to be powerfully not only transformational with regards to yourself, but also uh, with regards to what you could do for others in terms of the role that you take on. That Mars in the 10th is ruling the North Node and the Ascendant. ruling the chart, therefore. So that's your career. It's how you show up in the world. It's an important symbol for ambition. Now you're just at your Saturn return, and I have to say, and I don't want this to sound at all dismissive, but really, I genuinely feel that life begins after the first Saturn return. So I like to think of it as kind of like this whole phase up to the Saturn return is kind of like an experiment. And it's like, okay, this didn't work, we do this. This didn't work, we'll do that. You're moving things around at this stage where you're kind of testing the waters and moving around in a way that allows you to kind of decide, what am I here for? Um, and when Saturn comes through in the new year, you'll have this only in February, March, April. Then it comes back. Huh? It's a 9-month sort of birthing process, that Saturn return. But you haven't quite got there yet, so you still got this year to kind of work through that that sense of self and your emotional foundation and your psychological foundation. Then you get to the Saturn return, and it's like, okay, now this is where I really want to step up. This is where, and I would say, step up for myself. Step up and express myself through what I do creatively. This can even be a question like, do I want children? This can be one of those kinds of questions. It's like, maybe there's some kind of um, question that's coming up now, or maybe there's been a kind of a sense of, that's not really for me, and then all of a sudden it's like, yes, it's absolutely for me. So these are the kinds of things that can be changed over the next while, certainly very powerfully in 2024, as Saturn comes back to return to that Saturn.
I think those questions have already come up already in terms of children. That's been a big thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been a big like topic recently in terms
Right.
of, and do I or don't I? But it's like, previously I thought I didn't really want children, but now it's shifted because of experiences that have happened. So
Right. You'd be a great mother. You'd be a fantastic mother. One of the things that, the crazy thing about the chart, the astrology chart, shows often where we have some real difficulties that we have to overcome. But in the very act of overcoming them, and growing through them, we actually become really powerful. It's kind of a mastery. So the very thing that feels like it's an obstacle, whether that be connection, intimate connection with other people, connecting in a way to yourself, in a creative or self-expressed way to yourself, it actually becomes something you really get good at. That's the Saturn quality. At first, it's like, no, it's not quite like that. It'll require more of your effort. And it feels like there's an outer obstacle to that. And this is certainly what comes up when Saturn is opposing the midheaven. It feels like the obstacle is outside. It feels like, what in your case, one of the obstacles is perfectionism. Like I said, there's some kind of big deal expectations. Like, you're supposed to come in and rock the socks off this family, and somehow, I don't know, improve what they feel about themselves, or how the image of the family is. That's a lot to put on a child. So there's this kind of day-to-day expectation of really high standards, which then it's like, no no doubt you'd be pissed off at that, because that's a hard gig. And then that Mercury, which is squaring the nodal axis, which is about which direction to go. Like, do I stay with the old modus operandi, or do I go in a new direction towards myself, towards my north node, or do I carry on pleasing other people, making everybody else happy at my own expense? That ruler is trining the south node, so you can be very accommodating, perhaps a little too over giving of yourself, because of that. Again, that self-esteem thing comes in and says, maybe I'm not worth it, I need to do more for other people. But then you feel trapped by this is like that vicious circle that keeps going around until you come to the point of understanding, and that Saturn is there to come help you with that. And so, yeah, this pressure that is there, it comes from within you, but only because that was already an unspoken pressure that you came in with, And so the freedom that you feel like you're looking for is kind of the it's a bigger story than you. It's a story of like a freedom of expression, freedom of being yourself, freedom of how you show up in the world. It's a story of your parents, that they already were going through this, and your ancestors. And so where they're initially in life is a lot of struggle around that, and a feeling that it's like something out there that might be blocking that. Then you end up realizing, well, actually, no, all this strength that I need is just to keep myself motivated and to keep myself going. I don't have to waste my energy fighting other people, or trying to struggle my way through other people's opinions of me. This is another way of seeing that South Node in the seventh house, like a bit of an overemphasis on other people's opinions of you early in life, and that can take some time. It's only after the Saturn return towards the sort of mid to late 30s where you really start to go, what the hell? Like, I don't need to answer to your standards or dance to your tune. And then you start to realize, no, this is now me acting through my North Node, which is just showing up as myself on my terms, with the power of that scorpionic capacity for personal transformation, which is integrating something about what you're doing in the world. And that can just be how you show up in the world, but it can certainly be used to your advantage in terms of a career. And especially with the midheaven in Virgo, another way of seeing that, and the Chiron in Virgo too, is that you can actually work in healing arts as well. That's the healing axis, right? The midheaven in Virgo, the nadir or the IC, the Imamchela in the sign of Pisces. So this is that the healing axis. And that might be what you do, because Mars in the 10th house of your career is ruling your 6th house of everyday work and yourself. So that could be very lucrative if that's the kind of thing you're doing. And of course, healing can take many, many forms. And that midheaven is ruled by that Mercury, which requires through this lifetime some way of learning how to express your emotional and psychological needs, your feelings of security, expressing yourself, full stop, expressing your intellectual capacities, communicating in some way. But it's that pesky Mars up there in opposition to the sun, because it's about dosage. It's like, just maybe it's not so much necessarily the message, it might be in the delivery of the message where you get in trouble. If it's too strong, it can overpower people, and then you can turn friends into enemies just by being very abrupt. If that's coming up in terms of especially work, that can work against you with bosses, for example, managers or higher ups in work. And in that sense, it's really, really good working on your own. It's not that you couldn't work with other people, but you would do well working on your own, and you'd be successful. The moon in the 9th house, aside from the Cancer aspect of that, which makes it very maternal and very emotional, is it can be a little bit over. This is part of the paradox of your chart. Like I started to say, I didn't complete that thought. I think I started to say that one of the things of the chart was that there can be this pessimism and this a kind of a feeling of, what's the point, giving up a little bit before you really get to the meat of it. You might just find it too much and then give up, or you feel like, what's the point of starting? It's going to fail anyway. Everything's too hard. And that moon in the 9th has a very opposite quality, which is very much like, I should always be happy. Things should always be easy. And it's kind of overly optimistic in an almost charming and a naive way, but it can undermine your action, because it may not be terribly realistic. And that can be a problem, where the moon is actually in inconjunct to Uranus, and so your emotions may not be stable as well in terms of what it is that you desire. the moon is in the house of what you consider to be your purpose or your sense of reason for being here. And when it's in this inconjunct energy with Uranus, because Uranus is in the house of your willpower, the third house is like the goals, the kind of day-to-day goals and stuff, and that can be changeable. And so it means that you might be at times not really, you're selling yourself short, maybe the way to express that, where it's like you're aiming too low, let's say. So there's either this pie in the sky version that says everything should be great all the time, this should be easy, and that might have you decide, when it's not, that you just want to kind of check out of the game and give up, stop trying. But it's you've got to catch yourself in that. You don't want to sell yourself short, because that will undermine the potential that's in your chart, which is quite strong. The potential for success, with that Jupiter in the second house, you can absolutely have a materially successful career. And the Saturn on the IC gives you a certain sense of grounding or foundation that you didn't experience when you were a child. A feeling of stability is coming from you. The feeling of stability is what you create in your own life, and that comes back to that Mercury squaring the nodes, which is about that emotional, psychological awareness of what it is that you need and how you need to communicate that. I want to be sure you have some time for questions. Have I covered some of the things that you wanted to know about? Is there more?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you covered a lot. I think one thing I wanted to ask is around health. I don't know, with transits and things that are going on, do you see anything with health or anything? Because I do have a health concern at the moment. I don't know if you can see that in the chart, or if I know you mentioned inflammation, which is something I think I'm dealing with. You mentioned inflammation earlier with Mars. I think it was Mars opposite Pluto, I think you mentioned.
It's Mars opposite Pluto, but that's especially because Mars is ruling your sixth house, you see, so that can lead to real eruptions, and that can be emotional eruptions as well as physical eruptions, skin eruptions, or other inflammatory conditions. Mm-hmm. You do have Chiron that has been there in the sixth house of your everyday life and illness and health issues. It's been there since May of 2018, April, May of 2018. And so it is a good time to stay on top of those things, but I don't see anything particularly significant in terms of health.
Okay.
If there is, I think that it would show up after July, when the nodes go through the sixth house, the north node going through the sixth, the south node going through the 12th. It can have you now focusing more on health issues. I have to say, I don't see anything explicit coming up in terms of a transit. Okay. And so what I would suggest is, as long as Chiron is there, it's in a semi-sextile to your descendant, and it's in conjunct to your ascendant. So if there is a health issue, then monitor that, take care of that. It can be, again, because it's Chiron in Aries, it can be, again, something related to more of a psycho-emotional stress, that it's like, this, maybe the feeling, again, that life is full of struggle. This can be like potentially adrenal issues, for example, real exhaustion that is coming up from that. But take care of that. Chiron has already approached this degree. It's going to get back to the 19th degree in June, July. So this summer, I think, will be quite telling in terms of health. I'm not seeing anything significant jumping out. You are having your Mars return, and the nice thing that comes along with that is that Venus is accompanying Mars. So it softens that Mars return. And so you're going to, and Mars will then move on. Mars is going to continue his little journey through your 11th, and then Venus is going to continue throughout your 10th house. So a really, really great time for new opportunities in terms of work, in terms of how you show up in the world in general, can be very favorable. Good time for between the 5th of June and the 8th of October, good time for connecting with people or interviewing, for example, or just showing up in terms of what it is that you do. That Venus is ruling your 7th house of partnerships, which can be both intimate partners as well as business partners, and that will support that Jupiter too from your 10th house. So that's really beneficial. When Mars goes through the 12th house, now this comes back to the South Node issue, that will be an opportunity for you. So that's basically from the end of August. That's another opportunity for you to pay attention to your health. Mars going through the 12th can disrupt our mind, our sense of unconscious, the unconscious processes. It can just be kind of aggravating. It is your chart ruler as well, so it's quite, you always want to keep track of what Mars is doing. Luckily, it's not super long. It's going to be in your 1st house by mid-October. So as Venus goes into the 11th, Mars goes into the 1st, which is super energizing again for ambitious drive or for setting yourself up in a new venture or adventure. And then that's going to come up with the eclipses. That's going to tie in to the eclipse of, I think it's the 15th of October. Let's just have a look at that one, and then we'll have to leave it at that. Sorry, it's the day before. It was the 14th of October. That was the eclipse. So Mars is just in your 1st, and the eclipse is actually happening in your 12th.
Okay.
So I see this, again, it's a resonance for me with this is trining your sun, very supportive, eclipse trining your sun. It's a resonance for me to connect with your intimate self, your sense of your unconscious processes, dreams, for example, what aspects of yourself you want to explore in terms of the hidden aspects of yourself, but also in terms of family and ancestral healing. The 12th house for me is very deeply linked to ancestors. 4th house absolutely linked to lineage. It's more like the 4th house is like the ancestors we know, and the 12th house is the ancestors we didn't really know. And this could be a really interesting time for you to consider how to reconnect or connect with ancestral healing, and shed any patterns of fear, because Scorpio relates to fear, Pluto relates to fear. Pluto will be exactly conjunct your Uranus at that point. And shed fears that may not be entirely yours, fears or frustrations that are not entirely yours. So wherever, for example, forgiveness might be needed, this would be a great opportunity around that new moon, mid-October, to do some kind of ceremony or releasing of some kind. This is a South Node eclipse in the 12th house. This is really deep releasing, letting go, and allowing something different to come in. Anything else?
I think that was it. I think you did touch on most of everything that I asked in terms of relationships, health, and I can't remember what else I asked. I asked something else, but I think you touched on most of the things. I think just at the moment I'm dealing with a lot of, as you mentioned, there's a lot in my 7th house at the moment. Eclipses are happening. I've got a lot of people in my life. I've got a lot of confusion around self and relationships and how I'm relating to other people and what I want. And so for me, I think that's a challenge in this present moment. Is just, how do I move forward?
I would one thing I would suggest is that you give it a bit of time, that you don't try to figure this out, because it's a bit messy at the moment. It's a bit messy, and it's striking you very personally, especially with that Uranus opposing your ascendant. That's going to be quite confusing for a while. And Neptune is also in a sextile to your natal Neptune, which is another kind of confusing element. It's like you're not really getting complete clarity. You might not be being told the truth even by certain people in your life, or that you're doubting certain people in your life, for example, Neptune is approaching a trine to Pluto as well. So there can be some things that will be resolved, but only with a certain amount of, you're going to have to be quite high-minded, I think, with these quite challenging energies, especially the Pluto opposite Mars and the Pluto sextiling Pluto, which is a deep drive for change. The problem is that you're so, with Pluto sextile Pluto, which is already in the chart in the sense of this desire for freedom and desire to be kind of left alone, desire to be your own sort of free agent, there can be a kind of a reactive quality, and that won't really help you at this time. I think it would be good to really take your 10 breaths and go slowly. Neptune is also opposing Chiron. Oh, I just saw that Neptune opposing Chiron from Pisces to Virgo. Again, if there is an illness, if there is something that is bothering you, look for what is not visible. Look for emotional stress, look for family trauma that is latent, physically or emotionally in your body. And think of it in those terms, think of it more in the symbolic terms, because it's probably something that is much more emotionally connected or psychologically connected rather than an actual physical problem, if you know what I mean. But it may not be easy to spot because it is more of a spiritual question than a physical one. So take your time. I think things will definitely feel better when Jupiter moves into the 7th. The only thing is that when Jupiter goes in the 7th, relationships are quite preoccupying, but usually in a pretty nice way. Like you can expect that relationships will be pretty much on on full blast for the next year, pretty much, but not in a bad.
They already have been. So I don't know how much more it will be, but yeah.
Okay, but the good news is that Jupiter from the 7th going through Taurus is ruling your 5th house, Pisces, and that of course is love, and so that's quite conducive to, and it's trining your Venus in the 3rd, so that's conducive to more quality relationships or a better vibe in relationships, a better harmony in relationships. So I hope that for you. All right, well, thank you so much, Jay, for letting me look at your chart.
Thank you.
And I wish you all the best with all of these things. So take good care of yourself.
Thank you, you too. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay then. See you later. Bye.